This is episode 2 of the WrongFun Podcast, dedicated to all things science fiction and fantasy.
Welcome aboard. We've a long voyage ahead, so we've lined up the best entertainment money can buy. Let's welcome our hosts. Hailing from Oaks Colony, Sean, and from Broncoville Mining Colony, Allie. So sit down, strap in, and hold on while the captain fires the thrusters to maneuver the ship away from the station. Sooner or later, I will figure out these interlocks. Then, we'll see what happens when you turn up the gravity to 5 Gs.
Welcome back to the WrongFun Podcast.
You're a wrong fan, and you're having wrong fun.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Allie.
And together we're going to take you on a rocket ride in the science fiction and fantasy universe.
So let's get started, Sean. What have you been doing this past week?
Oh, trying to get episode 1 up in iTunes, all that stuff. Haven't got it in Stitcher Radio yet, but I imagine any day I'll get something from Stitcher saying it's up in Stitcher. But just trying to get everything set up.
Excellent. I'm not familiar with Stitcher.
Mostly it's for people who use Android.
Okay.
There's probably better ways to go about it, but some people really like Stitcher Radio. Stitcher Radio tends to be like a streaming service as opposed to a download service. You can download from it, but most people use it, I guess, as a streaming service.
Okay.
I think Android users would be far better served by using something called Podkicker. Podkicker sort of does the same thing that iTunes does, or the podcast app from iTunes in your iPhone does. So I think people would be better off with Podkicker.
Okay.
The other thing I did, apparently people listen to podcasts on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea. So for this podcast, I decided, well, I'll put it up on YouTube. And if nothing else, it'll give people a flavor of what the podcast is like and possibly convince them to go ahead and subscribe to it. If you got an iPhone, it's easy. You just open up the podcast app, subscribe to it, it magically appears. But getting it in Android with a Podkicker, kind of a pain. So, something to get people say, oh, well, this is worth it. I'll listen to that. I want it to magically appear on my phone so I can listen to it on the drive to work.
Yeah. I did like the YouTube link because I could send it to my kids because they're big YouTube fanatics and that's all they do. They would never listen to a podcast on anything else but YouTube. So I think it was a pretty good idea.
Okay. If that works.
Yeah.
The next thing is I am less than 24 hours from getting my second Kindle, the new Kindle Fire 7.
Sweet.
And I'm going to loan it to my wife. $50 for a Kindle, right? If you have been waiting to buy a Kindle, now is the time to buy a Kindle. Go to the show notes. The show notes for this are going to be wrongfun.com/episode 2. Click on the link, $50 for a Kindle Fire 7. And then you might want to think about getting Kindle Unlimited. You just signed up for that, didn't you?
I did sign up for it. I'm a little perturbed because I clicked on the wrong link when I went to get a book and ended up buying it instead of just using the Kindle Unlimited. So you may want to just be careful. But I like it so far.
I'm thinking about it. It's $10 a month. There's also a link for that in the show notes. I want to take a look and see, because we're reading so much this year stuff, 2015 stuff, so that we can review it and talk about it for the Hugos coming next year. I want to know how much of those new books are showing up in Kindle Unlimited before I pull the trigger on that. But there's a lot of really good stuff that I know is in it. I don't know how many times I've looked at something and saw buy it for this much, but just check it out from Kindle Unlimited.
Yeah, I got it because I read so much and I read all the time, so I figured it was worth it because most of the stuff I look up is read for free. Okay.
Let's save some money. I mean, this podcast is getting expensive just in books purchased.
Yeah. My bank account can't handle it.
Well, hopefully we'll get some subscribers here soon and, cover our server costs and we can start using the money to buy books, which, please send us some money so that we can do that.
Yes, please.
So next week's book, we talked about Marco. It's Klus is what it looks like, but actually his name is Marco Close. Angles of Attack, book 3 of his series. I've read, I actually pulled it off my bookshelf and said, did I actually read this? I have not, in the midst of all of the other things I've been doing, have not actually read book 3. I've read book 1. I read book 2. I got the audio for like some super cheap price, right? And last year for Thanksgiving, we drove to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. It's like 10 hours in a car one way. And I said, look, I want to listen to this first book. I've already read it, but, I wanted to listen to it on the audio. Mm-hmm. And we listened to that the whole way up. And never once did my wife say, oh, turn that garbage off. I thought that was pretty good, right? My wife and I tend to have slightly different tastes in books and music and everything. I like her, she likes me. That works out, I guess. But we got in the car after 4 days at my parents' house, and she looks at me, she's like, didn't you say you had book 2?
Excellent.
Can we listen to that on the way home?
You've converted
her. That's what you're getting into. That is what you're getting into with this book. Book 1 was so good that my wife voluntarily listened to book 2 and enjoyed that one too. So I'm looking forward to reading book 3 for next week. So Allie, I understand you've been trying to look up conventions, and you found us a link that will be like every convention everywhere?
I did. So I found a website that lists all of the conventions coming up all around the country, all around North America, really. Canada, Mexico, United States.
They have sci-fi conventions in Mexico?
Yes, they do.
Well, all right.
I know. Mexico City.
I've never been to Mexico City. Maybe we could figure out a way to go there. That'd be awesome.
That'd be wicked.
I love to travel. I wish I could travel more. I wish I could travel at all, to be honest. It's been a couple of years since I went anywhere.
I've not traveled a whole lot. Even when I used to work for an airline, I didn't even travel much when I worked for the airline. There's conventions all over the country, and it lists them by date. It also knows where you're at, and it lists what conventions are coming up in your area. So it's really cool.
Yeah, it should be interesting. I'm still trying to figure out if I can get into HonorCon. And that would be really cool. I really want to go there. And I could take all 3 of my Marco Close Frontline novels and have Marco sign them for me.
There you go. I've got a book signing coming up next week. Woohoo.
Ooh, you're signing books for people?
No, I'm going to go see Jim Butcher.
Oh.
I love me some Jim Butcher.
Yeah. Jim, watch out. Jim's getting married, isn't he?
Yeah, I'm sad.
Oh, well.
He actually got engaged at the Ren Fair out here in Colorado, which was pretty cool. I've watched the video.
Oh, okay. Is he from the Colorado area?
I believe he's from Missouri. I have no idea how he ended up out here.
He writes in Chicago, doesn't he? Doesn't he write about Chicago? The Jim Butcher book that I read for the Hugos last year.
Was it a Dresden Files?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and they take place in Chicago.
Right. Okay, so I kind of assumed that's where he was from. Is he not from there?
Nope.
Oh, okay. I can't imagine writing about Chicago and not having to actually live there, because I can't imagine why anybody would say, oh, let's write about Chicago, because I don't like the place.
Oh, I love Chicago. I'm from Chicago. Chicago's awesome.
Yeah, if you could knock down the actual city of Chicago, it looks like it would be a nice place. Right there on the lake. It looks like it's a beautiful looking lake.
Oh no, the skyline is gorgeous. Especially if you take they have a sunset boat ride that you could take on the lake. Oh, it's amazing. With the city there. It's so awesome.
I was there when I was in the Navy, and they were super nice. Mm-hmm. I mean, the city had lots and lots of stuff to do. If you were in uniform, you got into basically everything for free. It's just, it was still Chicago.
I love Chicago. And the food. I love the food. I miss the food. Chicago's awesome.
Sean, you have an incoming call on the Ansible.
Who is it?
It's our guest, Eric S. Raymond.
Computer, what do your databanks have on Mr. Raymond?
Eric S. Raymond, often referred to as ESR, is an American software developer. He is the author of the 1997 essay and 1999 book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, and is primarily known as an open-source software advocate. He's also a New York Times best-selling author, a martial artist, a swordsman, a firearms rights activist, and an old-school war gamer. Eric's first published fiction was a John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer nominee in 2015, which was his first year of eligibility.
Patch him through. Well, welcome to the show, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Computer, the audio quality is poor. Can you fix it?
I'm sorry, Sean, but the ship is currently transiting an area of poor Ansible reception. I've boosted Mr. Raymond's signal as much as possible.
Okay.
What does he think? That I don't know the signal is poor? I'm the computer. I know everything about this ship.
Science fiction, fantasy, mystery, horror are often referred to as genre fiction. Can you explain to me what they mean when they say genre?
A genre is a set of shared conventions and expectations shared between the artists who produce the genre and the audience that consumes it.
What distinguishes science fiction from other genres, or what has been termed literary fiction?
Well, my belief, after having read a lot of science fiction and a lot of the history of the genre, coincides with Gregory Benford's definition of science fiction, which, and the way he put it is, science fiction is the branch of fantastic literature which affirms the rational knowability of the universe and has as its most characteristic experience the sense of wonder, the feeling that you have suddenly understood the universe in a new and larger way.
And how does that contrast with, say, literary fiction or maybe some other genres?
Well, let's take a couple of closer genres as examples. Fantasy wants to give you an emotional, mythic, depth psychology kind of experience, but the element of rational knowability is absent. You don't typically walk away from a fantasy novel feeling that you understand something about reality or the author's secondary world that you didn't understand when you walked in. Mystery, by contrast, also affirms rational knowability. The whole point of a mystery is that there is a solution that fits the clues that you're being presented, and it can be deduced, and if the writer is good, you have the potential to deduce the solution from those clues, but you don't get to it before the author wants you to.
Mm-hmm.
What distinguishes mystery novels from science fiction is that they're not fantastic literature. There's no counterfactual premise in there. We're in a world very like the one that the reader already knows.
And how about literary fiction?
Literary fiction, as it has developed in the 20th and 21st centuries, is primarily concerned with the exploration of character. It's not interested in affirming rational knowability or any other kind of ideas at all outside of a very narrow range of socio-political criticism.
Okay. Well, in a world where everyone seems to be trying to market their books and TV shows as X meets Y as done by Z, does the concept of genre in fiction actually mean anything anymore?
Well, these crossovers wouldn't have any power. They wouldn't have any marketing draw if not for the genres that they're spoofing. In a way, every crossover is a tribute to the enduring power of the genre that it's taking off from.
In your essay, Why the Deep Norms of the SF Genre Matter, you suggest that if an author doesn't respect these deep norms, they aren't actually writing science fiction.
That's correct.
Are you suggesting that a person can write a story with rocket ships and space stations and not actually be writing science fiction?
Absolutely. And in fact, in the hands of stupid and inferior writers, it happens all the time. Conversely, it is possible to write a story full of fantasy tropes that is nevertheless science fiction in the deep sense. And I'll give you an example of a current author who does that sort of thing all the time. Brandon Sanderson in the Final Empire books. These have the tropes of fantasy, but structurally and logically, they are science fiction. And there's actually a long tradition of this in the genre. It's called the technology of magic story and goes back to the 1940s.
Oh, okay. I was kind of wondering about those magic technology things. How does it work? There's your rational knowability right there.
One of the characteristics of the technology of magic story, going back to its original in the 1940s, which was L. Sprague de Camp and Fletcher Pratt's The Roaring Trumpet, is an essential part of the plot is the protagonists are trying to figure out how the magic works or extend the magic system. It's possible to know things in the technology of magic story that extend your ability to do more magic. This is as opposed to a straight-up fantasy like the Harry Potter novels, in which we have magic as a given, but nobody ever understands it. There is no sense in which the characters know more about the magic when the novel ends than when it began.
But just hand-waving midichlorians doesn't really change that, does it?
No, and in fact, I remember thinking when midichlorians were introduced that this was an attempt by a guy who had written a space fantasy to recover some SF cred, but it was a fairly lame one. It was more a gesture in that direction than a real move.
In another essay, you discuss your view that the current culture war in sci-fi isn't really a political argument. even though the two sides tend to break down to broadly conservative and libertarian on one side and broadly left-wing on the other. If it isn't a political argument, what's it really about?
It's an argument over whether the genre should continue to affirm its traditional values and conventions, the rational knowability, and what my friend Ken Burnside jocularly calls competence porn, or be turned into something else, a brand of message fiction with primarily political and literary interests.
If there's a view that science fiction needs to be more literary, why would science fiction writers want to be more literary? What's driving them down that path?
In my essays, I've described it as literary status envy. This is something that we've actually seen before in other fields. Jazz used to be dance hall music, but jazz players got a bad case of status envy. They wanted the kind of respectability that classical musicians had. And the result was that jazz went some very strange and unproductive places for a long time. In literature, literary status envy, what happens when that manifests is people who are writing good genre fiction decide that they've suddenly got to be just like, James Joyce or Thomas Pynchon or whoever's currently fashionable. And they start writing elaborate, convoluted, mysterious, foggy novels of character and throw away all their genre values. These generally don't sell very well.
So you're saying this is basically jazz? If somebody plays swing music, I've got to dance. And if somebody plays that stuff they're calling jazz in a club someplace, I got to leave. That's the same thing that's happening with science fiction?
Well, it depends on what your tastes are. Maybe you like the stuff they're playing in jazz clubs.
Well, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Play me some swing music. Get it back in the gutter where it belongs.
Aha! Yes, a common slogan among science fiction fans. Fans who are saying, get it back in the gutter where it belongs, what they're really saying is, this is our genre. We know what we want the rules to be. If you don't want to play by those rules, go somewhere else.
Well, during our last voyage, speaking of Ken Burnside, Ken pointed out Orson Scott Card's mice quotient. He said what you call classic science fiction focused on milieu, idea, and especially excitement, and tended to give a lot less attention to characterization.
That's correct.
About literary fiction, he says,
literary fiction tends to go character development at the expense of everything else. And you go too far into it, and you get into competitive navel-gazing via tone poem.
What's the problem with that?
Well, it doesn't happen to be what I like. It doesn't happen to be what science fiction fans like. I think it's pretty sterile as a general thing. And I don't want people turning science fiction into a poor imitation of that.
You say the sad puppies are fighting the wrong war in the wrong way. What's the right war, and what's the right way?
The right war would be to point out what is valuable and special about science fiction that literary improvers undervalue and want to discard, and talk about that rather than about politics.
Can you give us some examples of things that we should really be pushing?
I think the easiest thing to explain to people who are outside the field is probably sense of wonder, the visceral experience that you get it. Something makes sense that didn't make sense before. If you don't have that, you don't have the characteristic emotional payoff of the science fiction story.
All right, thank you, Eric. I appreciate you spending some time with us. Any final words for the listeners?
I think I'd like to point out that science fiction has a function. It has a mission, which rational inquiry and sense of wonder are aspects of. Science fiction is how, as a species, we prepare ourselves for the future, how we project ourselves imaginatively into the future and ask ourselves, when this arrives, if this arrives, how are we going to cope? And that is a functional reason, apart from all aesthetic ones, that we need to be careful about preserving the values and conventions of science fiction, because if we don't do that, it can't do that job anymore, and we need that as a species.
It seems to me that there's a lot of people who are actively avoiding planning for the future. They don't want us to progress. I'm wondering if they're the same people who don't want science fiction to talk about progressing into the future.
I think there's a lot of overlap, yes.
All right, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You can find more from Eric S. Raymond at esr.ibiblio.org. That's esr.ibiblio.org. Links to the essays referenced here, as well as links to both his fiction and nonfiction works, are in the show notes.
So I've always thought of sci-fi as just a space, time travel, or futuristic kind of story, and not really anything beyond that.
Yeah, that was the really interesting part about starting this journey for me, was because I'd never really thought about what was science fiction. It was the books I read, but, I hadn't really done any serious thinking about, well, what is genre? What fits in the genre? And why is that important? And it's been really helpful to have people clarify what exactly, they're on about with this whole genre thing.
Yeah, I really liked it. It was like having your own little personal lesson.
Well, I'm glad that we can find people who do the heavy thinking for me. I mean, I'll do some thinking, but, it's not something that ever really came up. I mean, I read science fiction. I'm very interested in it. But why? What's specific about it makes it this and not that? I can tell you what makes light red and what makes light blue. That I've been taught in school, but nobody ever said, okay, look, the reason this is science fiction, why it fits in this science fiction box is this. So that rational knowability that he was talking about. Yeah. And the other thing that strikes me that, as a person who, I ran a business as a child. My parents had a sewing shop, so my brother and we ran the Coke machine. My father was trying to make sure that we understood the concept of, you need to have more money coming in than going out, how businesses operate. And you have to be able to signal to your customers what it is you're offering to them, right? You can't just open up a store and not put up anything in it and expect people are going to wander in and try to buy what they want.
Yeah, you got to kind of advertise.
At the very most basic advertisement is standing there holding up the product that you have.
Yep.
Right? If you sell tacos, you probably should have a picture of a taco on your little taco truck. If you just have a white bread truck, maybe they'll get close enough that they'll smell the taco. But if you don't put a picture of the taco on the taco truck, they're not going to know. I mean, that is basic marketing right there. Now, it gets more complex than that, but what if you put a picture of a taco on the truck and they show up looking for a taco and you shove a burger in their face? There's a basic rule there. If you offer somebody something in your advertisement, you should deliver something close to their expectations.
Yeah.
It's okay to be better than their expectations. Oh, I thought I was getting, this not very exciting burger, and I got something that's really super nice. I'm definitely coming back. But if you offer them one thing and you don't give them that, if you offer them a science fiction book, what you really give to them is some exploration of the character's inner monologue, you really kind of screwed them over, haven't you?
Yeah.
It's very interesting to hear, oh, okay, look, this really isn't a political argument. It's not an argument over you're a liberal and I'm a conservative, you're a this or I'm a that. It's, well, that's not science fiction. That's more literary fiction. You're not giving me what I expect when I show up for your science fiction book.
I crave action and adventure, and you're not giving it to me.
And that's a fair thing to say. If you really don't want action and adventure, that's okay. That's all right. You don't have to.
Yeah.
But you do have to deliver. If you put a spaceship on the front of your book, I'd kind of like a little space travel going on in there.
Exactly.
And in the middle of the interview, when he said something, I cannot remember what triggered it, but that whole bit about hand-waving midichlorians, wait a minute, Star Wars is not science fiction? It's actually space fantasy?
That kind of blew my mind, too.
I was like, that's where it hit me. I had never even considered that Star Wars really isn't science fiction. At what point do they say, well, how is life going to be different if we have this one different thing?
And they really don't.
No, it's a magical story in space.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically, well, where did he get the story? Right, the entire story was like a Kurosawa story, wasn't it? Wasn't like the Seven Samurais, but it was another story that was, out of Japanese cinema, like historical fiction from the samurai era of Japan.
I did not know that.
Not too big on the science fiction roots of or the
Star
fantasy
Wars.
roots of Star Wars. But, I did watch something about how the entire story was basically he and somebody else were totally into this particular genre of Japanese movies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, we watch Chinese wire fighting movies. Wu Shao. I cannot remember it, and don't send hate mail on that.
I just call them all kung fu movies. I love my kung fu movies.
Kung fu movies are one thing, but like the kung fu movies that are the fantasy version of China way back when.
Like Bride with White Hair.
I've never seen that one, but who's the guy who always does the color changes? The just beautiful movies where the colors change in them, like they'll have these leaves that are falling and they change to a different color.
I haven't seen any of those.
And it's all like Chinese wire fighting. And like they're running and having this giant fight in a bamboo forest. It's freaking amazing. I love watching that. I mean, like, they put so much effort into it that it turns into, it doesn't look like a bunch of idiots on wires. It looks like this magical flying kickboxing tournament.
Yeah.
And so basically Star Wars comes out of that same sort of fantasy in Japan rather than China.
Mm-hmm.
So Star Wars is just sort of a westernization of Japanese fantasy history sort of movies.
I never really thought of it that way. It makes sense though.
Well, they got Jedi Knights.
Yep, Jedi Knights, lightsabers.
Sword fighting.
Yeah.
If they'd have set the entire thing in a forest in Germany, it'd have been any Knights of the Round Table story.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, basically.
So yeah, the whole Star Wars is space fantasy, not sci-fi. I was like, that's literally where it hit me, is in the middle of discussing that with him.
And when you mentioned midichlorians and the fact that it was a fantasy, that's kind of when it hit me as well. I never really thought of fantasy as being a space movie, so...
I thought that's what science fiction was. If it was in space, it was sci-fi.
Exactly.
If it involves people whacking each other with swords and riding around on horses, it was fantasy, right? If there was magic and swords and, that was fantasy. And wait a minute, that's basically all Star Wars was.
Yeah.
Was magic and swords.
Well, and it helps me to classify other stuff that I read, like the Dresden Files, because it's modern time, but it's magic. So what is it?
It's urban fantasy.
Exactly.
Dresden Files does qualify basically as urban fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with urban fantasy. Urban fantasy does not mean sparkly vampires.
Exactly. Thank God.
Right? And I know we mock the poor lady for writing her sparkly vampire novel, but you know what? The lady sold a whole bunch of copies, so she's pleasing somebody.
Yeah, good for her.
Right? So we need to, if we're going to make fun of her, we need to climb down off our high horses and let people enjoy their stuff. I'm not interested personally in sparkly vampires, but, it makes people happy. So who's the idiot here? The lady who wrote it and made a lot of money? Or the guy standing here going, well, I would never write that. You're right, you wouldn't.
The person complaining about it is the one who's, yeah.
Yeah. So Larry Correia, his books are urban fantasy. He's got one series where they're chasing down monsters all over the United States and apparently the world, and they're fighting these fantastical monsters that nobody knows about because they try to keep it as secret as possible. The other one is set like pre-World War II, and I don't know when it was set really, and it's basically this fight between two different groups of people who wield sort of magic.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I thought, we weren't supposed to like that. That was like girl fiction. That was like the, 14-year-old girls reading their sparkly vampire stories. Well, guess what? You wake up one day and realize, oh, guess what? Yeah, I guess I have my own little sparkly vampire story, don't I?
Hey, whatever floats your boat, right?
And that's kind of really what we're going with this on that whole, look, if that's what you like, that's what you like. There's no problem with that. But give us what we're expecting. If we are expecting something exciting to happen, give us something exciting to happen. Don't bait and switch us with a picture of a spaceship on the front and then give me some long navel-gazing story about somebody's internal monologue.
Yeah.
It's like, well, who are you writing the book for?
Are you writing it for us? Are you writing it for critics, other authors, award judges? Who are you writing for?
Yeah. Who are you writing your book for? And it's okay, honestly, if you want to write a book that's critically acclaimed and sells nothing, it's your life, it's your time, it's your work. Knock yourself out. It doesn't hurt my feelings. But don't try to market it to me as this great science fiction novel when it has nothing for me in it. Don't bait and switch me like that.
Yeah.
So it seemed to me that really science fiction was project ourselves into the future and see what's different. It's one thing to put ourselves in the future and then consider how we feel about that, right? What changes? In the future, we got some extraterrestrial species that attacks us. Now, how are we going to deal with that?
Yeah.
And how do we feel about that? Can we work through whatever issues that brings up? These are all valid things to talk about in a book, but there has to be that aspect to it, that it's something that's happening, something that's changed, something that's factual, even though it's not really true. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Faster than light travel, of course, has always been the one MacGuffin that everybody gets for free. You don't count that one. But there, you can change one thing and then look at what the world looks like after that. It seems like there's a lot of stories that are just like, let's look inside ourselves and ignore the rest of the world outside ourselves. And then how does that science fiction? It's the interaction between the inside and the outside. What is the future change in us?
Yeah.
What will that cause us to do?
Yeah, I want to read an actual story. I don't want to read about someone's feelings or what is this making me feel? I don't want to hear about that. I want to know what happens. I want to know what's going on around them.
But I don't want it to all be action either.
No, you want a little bit of both. It's got to be a balance.
Right, and I read The Martian. I don't know if you've read The Martian yet.
I have
It's
not.
coming out in a movie. And it is straight up competence porn. It is, I am so amazing. I can come up with all these solutions to these problems that come up. Oh, I'm going to starve to death in X number of days. Well, I'll start growing potatoes on Mars. But even that, which is, very, very far deep into the heroic engineer story, there's a lot of how he feels about it, what he's dealing with. Now, there's a lot less of that than you will see in people who put more of a premium on that, but that's still there.
Yeah.
And I want to see some of that too. It's interesting to see how somebody solves a problem. Somebody put it that The Martian as a movie is, remember in the movie Apollo 13, where they grabbed a couple of engineers and said, here's a bunch of parts, put them together.
Yes, I remember that.
And it was just this little short part of the movie, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, stretch that out to feature length.
Yeah.
Just that part. Okay, that could get real boring real quick.
Real fast.
Right. And if you watch Apollo 13, what did we see? We saw we're solving the problem. But there was also, here's the family. What does the family think?
Yeah.
Here's the people. How are they dealing with what they're having to deal with? It's not just a technical, we do this, a list of things that they did. That's not what's going on. There's much more to it. And so I'm totally sympathetic to the argument there needs to be more than just a list of crap you did.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I don't care about a character until you tell me why I should care about him. He's a human being. Okay, I care.
Yeah.
Most people care. But still, what drives the guy? Why do I care? So yeah, absolutely. Those people are saying, oh, no, you really got to characterize the guy. Sure you do.
But you can't make it all that, though.
Exactly. What I really got from the last two, both of the last two people we've spoken to, but, especially from Eric S. Raymond here, was that the genre was a deal that was made. It was a deal that was made between the author and me. This is what I'm going to deliver. And I say, this is what I expect, so I'm going to take this offer and I'm going to give you money, and then I'm going to read it, and I'm expecting to receive what I purchased, what you said I was purchasing. So if you're going to write in that genre, you need to make sure that you understand what it is that I am expecting and what, broadly speaking, all people are expecting out of that genre, and then deliver that. Now, put your spin on it, show me how you can do that better than the next guy, and then I'm showing up with my money for your next book.
Oh, yeah.
Like Lois McMaster Bujold, for all that there's some space opera going on, serious hard, I only care about the characters.
Yeah.
Tell me why Miles's cousin Ivan has been such a mediocrity his entire life.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's why? Oh, that makes so much sense. Everything becomes clearer about him. That is it. It's all there. I know why he's doing this now. That was fantastic. It's something that's happened since the very first book he appeared in. You've known this about him, but you didn't know why. And then I don't know how many books later, 10, 12? Hey, this is why. And it's always been there, that his character has always driven his actions. And it was really cool to find that out. But I wouldn't have got to that point if I wasn't interested in the character and him doing the things I kind of expect. You know, every once in a while he would surprise me. And Miles was just one big surprise after another. But I cared about the characters. And then the stories fit around it. So the whole argument over whether you should spend a lot of time on characterization or spend a lot of time on excitement and things that are happening, do both.
You do. You need a balance. Because you want to care about what you're reading. You don't want just like some cheesy action movie, you know?
Cardboard cutouts, yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to read everything. You don't want everything to be exactly the same.
It's very interesting to me to see, okay, this is what science fiction is. And it's a big box. It is a very large box to play in.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to play inside the box. If you're going to get out of the box, you have to have enough inside the box so that the people who are expecting that inside the box book can follow you out to where you're going to go and go, oh yeah, I'm right with you. I want to do this.
You have to think about your audience. You have to think about who you're writing to. Like we were saying earlier, are you playing to the average reader or are you playing to the critics?
So let's move on to the book reviews.
All right. So this week we read 2 pieces of short fiction, Henrik's Demon by Lois McMaster Bujold, and an older novelette, Bloodchild by Octavia Butler.
So Allie, Bloodchild, what did you think of this piece of short fiction that won both the Hugo and the Nebula Award?
Oh, I knew we were going to get to this part. I hated this book. It was horrible. I have 3 words for this. Rapey, creepy, and slavery. It was awful. I don't even think it should be sci-fi. I think it should be horror. It was horrible. It was creepy. I can't believe it won any awards, honestly. It was just so... ugh.
Maybe we should kind of describe what's going on.
Okay.
So basically we've got this group of humans who has somehow or other ended up on a different planet. That planet has sentient species that's basically kind of insect-like. And they reproduce by injecting their eggs, their fertilized eggs, into the bodies of mammals.
And not only that, they drug you with the unfertilized egg.
We get to that. Let's get to that. You know, I mean, like they had their own mammalian creature, some sort of warm-blooded creature that lived on the planet, and that's how they did their reproduction. But when humans came along, they found that the humans were way better hosts. And, you know, what happens when you've got your entire species is completely overwhelmed and dominated by this extraterrestrial species? Well, I mean, in their case, they're not extraterrestrial. They're living on their own planet.
Yeah.
But you're totally dominated by them. You are basically slaves.
Exactly.
There's nothing you can do to fight your way out of this.
No.
And so they inject the eggs into the living bodies of males almost exclusively because they wanted to leave the females to reproduce their own species and kept them kind of as pets.
Yeah, it was creepy. They kept them as pets and they drugged them. Oh God. They drugged the children. I mean, come on.
So wanted to read a little bit out of the author's afterword because in this book she wrote a bunch of short stories, but she wrote little afterwords for each one.
Mm-hmm.
It amazes me that some people have seen Bloodchild as a story of slavery. It isn't. It's a number of other things, though. On one level, it's a love story between 2 very different beings. On another, it's a coming-of-age story in which a boy must absorb disturbing information and use it to make a decision that will affect the rest of his life.
Cross-species love story. Can we say bestiality?
Except I don't understand where you get the love story in there.
I don't either. Well, because he decided to... I mean, are we doing... Can I... Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert!
Well, I mean, nobody's going to listen to your description of it and say, I've got to go out and read this book. You know, it's a novelette. It's not very long, but, you know, hey, for $3 you can read it, and there's a bunch of other short stories. I've got a link for it if, after listening to Allie's Well, Allie's trying not to vomit. I'm watching her, but she's just grossed out it is pretty bad.
It's nasty. Love story, I could see like between brothers or other family members where I love my other family member so much I don't want them to go through this.
Yeah, that's not
yeah.
Right. But if you took two humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a human took another human family prisoner, kept them drugged, and then impregnated them, this would not be a love story.
No, it would mean jail time.
Right.
It would be a horror. It would be
Seriously.
horrible. It's horror.
It's a horror story.
Yes, it's a horror story.
And of course it's in space, or it's on a planet that is not ours, and it has an extraterrestrial in it, or at least a non-Earth life creature, living creature, whatever. It's really difficult to explain. It's hard to move my point of view to another planet. But in any case, we have aliens who are holding humans prisoner and forcibly impregnating them after keeping them drugged for their entire life.
No, remember, they're not prisoners.
Oh, yeah, they're pets. They're on a preserve.
I know. Yes, they're on a preserve. It's like a wildlife preserve with humans. It's creepy.
Except they're not even left to live out in the wild. They're just allowed to live there without being disturbed by the other creatures who might not show them the kind of concern. And I mean, it's like, if you had lions running through downtown Denver, what would happen? They would get shot.
Yes. Well,
right?
And she even talks about how everything is caged. She cages them. She cages them constantly. So
but she's talking about holding the
exactly
their legs around them.
She's holding them around. She's she almost sounds like a reptile more than I don't know. It's kind of a cross between insect and reptile when I'm reading it. And then she kind of wraps herself around them, but she actually calls it caging. And I mean, come on.
This entire story is an extraterrestrial Roman Polanski novel.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like drug the child, not a full-grown adult, the child, until it says, oh yes, I will let you stick your eggs in me and let them suck my blood and grow into grubs and wiggle around inside me.
Oh God, I'm gagging.
Oh yes, straight up horror movie. It's just a horror movie in space.
Ugh.
If you made that as a movie, it would be R just on the gross. But it won a Hugo and a Nebula.
Well, good for her. It is not my thing, though.
No. Octavia Butler is fairly well regarded as a science fiction author.
Yeah.
So good for her. But this novelette, not doing it for either of us.
This novelette did not speak to me. Not nicely.
It whispered gross things in my ear while I was trying to sleep is what it did.
I had nightmares.
You did tell me that. Yeah, nightmares from it. So, this is not a novelette for enjoying. This is a novelette for laying down and avoiding.
Yeah. Unless you really like horror, then yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, if you want extraterrestrial Roman Polanski, if you want creatures burrowing in the body and sucking the blood and
eating their way out.
If it goes sideways, they kill the person. If that's what you want to read, $3. Go to the show notes, check the links. Bloodchild, Octavia Butler. It's Bloodchild and Other Stories. It's a series of short stories by Octavia Butler. So you get more than just this one, and I will eventually get around, hopefully, to reading the rest.
I started reading the second one. I'm not finished with it yet. They're all kind of... I'm wondering if she had some issues. I mean, they're all a little wow.
And you're not talking wow good. You're talking wow.
I'm talking just wow.
Yeah. You don't even get a good oh my out of it. No. It's like, oh dear.
Oh my word, as my grandmother would say.
So, was Lois McMaster Bujold's Penrick's Demon any better for you?
I loved it. I was immediately sucked into that book. I love that book. I love Penrick. I love the demon. I love everything. It was great.
So, any wonder as to why she's my favorite author?
Yeah, I can see why. And now she's going to be, I'm going to have to read everything.
Well, Lois, there you go. You just sold a whole crap load of books to Allie.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, you can't believe how there's just so much there. The problem is she's on the sort of the downhill slide of her career. She's like semi-retired at this point.
Lois, no retiring.
Yeah, I know.
Keep writing.
And we want more on this Penrick thing, don't we?
Oh, yeah. I would love to see more Penrick.
Right. So, yeah, she's my favorite author, and I have a copy of basically everything that this woman has written, including the straight-up SF romance anthology that she had one short story in. Haven't read a single thing by anybody else in that book, but I have that one because it's a story about Sergeant Tora and Armsman Roik, and I had to have it. It's called Winter Fair Gifts. Oh, my goodness, I love that. And it's just this, it is a straight-up romance. There's nothing... I mean, like, I don't read romance novels, but I was totally going to read that one.
I will admit that I have several books like that just for my obsession. My Jim Butcher.
So this novella, Penrick's Demon, is set in the world of the five gods. And just a little background, the five gods are the, god for each of the seasons, and then there's one wild card god. The gods can touch humans, like to affect them, but mostly only if the humans let them. In one of the other books, there's this discussion of what a human has to do in order for the god to fill them. And it's this glass. If you hold the glass right side up, you can pour wine into it. But if you hold the glass upside down, in that you're rejecting being filled up by the god, it just goes all over the ground. So, the god can't force himself on you exactly.
Okay.
And so it's a world where there's a distinct interplay between gods and people.
Okay. As
opposed to the world we're in, where we consider, if you believe in miracles, they're pretty hidden.
Yeah.
We don't have lightning bolts out of the blue. Oh, look, hey, it was another miracle from God. That's not how it works in this world.
We don't have Zeus coming down to visit.
Right. Outside of the comic books, that's just not the way it goes. In the world of five gods, that is something that happens. And it's very interesting. They also have sorcerers, and sorcerers are people who possess demons, which is really too difficult to explain what a demon is, but it's not a demon in the sense of, the Christian mythology of what a demon is. But the demons could, if they get out of control, if they take over, they're very dangerous. So the story is that Penrick, what did you think of Penrick himself?
I liked him. He was just a really likable guy. He was awesome.
But not like a perfect character. Oh, everything's wonderful. Penrick never does anything wrong.
No. He was just a normal, average, everyday kind of country bumpkin kind of guy. And he was just very friendly, and you liked him.
Yep.
Immediately, you liked him.
He's about to be betrothed to the daughter of a rich cheese merchant because he's a noble, but, his family doesn't have any money.
They even kind of rolled their eyes at the cheese, sort of, and it was just kind of amusing. I mean, it was just, oh, God, more cheese.
More cheese, well, yeah. If it's
funny.
The big thing in the area, right?
Yeah.
So you just listen to him and you're like, this is pretty funny. It's just like all these details that I don't think that Bujold really put those details there. They just appeared. Yeah. Because there's these pieces that you hung things on, and then all of a sudden the world appeared around you.
Yeah.
You were saying something about how it was such a detailed and rich world. It was just like it was all there. You had a picture.
You had a picture in your head immediately. It was very well written, and you really do get a picture immediately of who he is and what he's about and what he's and it's really within the first few pages. It's really quick.
I was amazed. I went back and I read it a second time, and it was like I knew all about where his life was going, and it went sideways in the middle of page 2.
Yep.
Page 2, it goes sideways. Wait a minute. How did Lois put this much explaining what was going to go, and she's a page and a half, 2 pages into this novella,
she's good.
already know all this about him, and it's gone sideways. As the book goes along, there's more of the details that are backfilled in, but you know so much so fast.
You get a really good picture of him.
That is a good writer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I loved it. Hey, it said Lois McMaster Bujold. We were going to read it.
Yeah.
So I may as well start off right up front and read it.
This one I would definitely put as a contender for the novella, for sure. I really liked it.
Right. It's going to take something to really push her to the side.
Yeah, this is already automatically on my recommended list.
For our listeners, do you think it's worth the $4 for them to go out and get it on Kindle?
Oh, yeah.
It's Kindle only, so get a Kindle or get a Kindle reader for something you already have, like an iPad or, God forbid, your iPhone or some other kind of little phone you can read on. I mean, I have a friend who does that. I'd go cross-eyed. And spend the $4 and get this. You are going to love it. And then once you've read it, you're going to want to read the other 3 books set in that world.
Oh, yeah.
Which are equally good. The entire 3-book series is available on Kindle for $21 on Amazon. I've got a link to it's the Chalian series, though she said that it really is the World of the 5 Gods is what she's really going to call it. Go there, pick up all 3 of those books. Once you've read Penrick's Demon, you're going to want to read the rest. And they are fantastic.
Yeah, I can't wait to read them.
You've already, yeah.
They're on my list.
So that's our show for the week. Remember that the WrongFun Podcast runs on your donations. We count on you to donate or subscribe to cover our server costs and our book and equipment expenses. And oh my, the book expenses. Making a podcast is a whole lot of fun, but it's not cheap. Please consider making a donation or subscribing. Go to wrongfun.com and click on the PayPal link. You can make a one-time donation of any amount or subscribe for as little as $2 a month. That doesn't sound like much, but we pay our server costs monthly. It's a tiny amount to you, but it's a giant help to us.
Thanks for joining us on this voyage. Music courtesy of Simplify Recordings.
Send your feedback, both good and great, to feedback@wrongfun.com.
Show notes can be found at wrongfun.com/episode 2.
The captain has locked onto the station and turned off the fasten safety restraint sign, and you are free to move about the cabin. We hope you've enjoyed your journey with us on the WrongFun Podcast. Don't forget to like and share the WrongFun Podcast on Facebook. And if you've booked your travel today through iTunes, make sure to leave us a glowing 5-star review. And remember, this show is powered entirely by your donations. See our website at wrongfun.com for details.
This is a URS production.
Random noise.